Hi everybody, I'm excited to see you all a little bit more in person than the last couple of weeks of videos. Today's topic is reproductive control. We're going to start with a definition of reproductive control that comes from an amicus brief that Planned Parenthood filed in a court case with the Supreme Court in 1991. And it said, "The control of reproductive capacity is at the heart of women's self-governance and moral personhood." So this is a good place for us to start. It gives us some framework, some theoretical framework for thinking about reproductive control. But let's unpack this a little bit more. What we're saying here is that the ability to decide when, if, and how to have children is at the core of a person's ability to control their own lives and destinies. So a person with a uterus who is able to have control over the when, the if, and the how of having children has control over the reproductive future. If this person with a uterus is engaging in penile vaginal intercourse, the possibility of becoming pregnant occurs. And to keep in mind that this can happen by that person's choice, or it could happen not by that person's choice. And so reproductive control also has to include the ability to make decisions before and after that would occur. So if you look at this slide, it's referencing The Handmaid's Tale, which I knew more as a book than a TV show, but it's been in the news a lot as a television series. And the thing about The Handmaid's Tale, which is talking about the loss of reproductive control by the individuals that it affects, is that when Margaret Atwood wrote this book, she was very clear that the things that she's describing here actually happen to real people and have happened through history to many women. The only difference with this book and television series is that these things are happening to white women. So when you watch this, think about that, and think about the difference of reproductive control that has traditionally happened in different communities. What is choice? If we go back to Bell Hooks' definition from one of our very first weeks together, Bell Hooks indicated that oppression is the absence of having a choice. Oppression is not having a choice. So for example, here in Michigan, Walmart for a while, now they do, but in the past, refused to carry what's called Plan B. And in communities where there were no other pharmacies or stores to go to, that effectively meant that Walmart made the decision for the people living in that community about what their choices were going to be about Plan B. So access to services is fundamental to having choices. You can't make a decision if there aren't any choices to be made. When we're thinking about reproductive control over our own bodies, but our choices are limited to what our insurance will pay for, or what our state allows that's different from another state. When it's based on what our employer has decided is the best form of birth control or reproductive control for us, then we have to ask whether we have choice. And to also point out that choice is not just about not having children, choice is also about having children. So if your insurance doesn't cover infertility treatments, then you also don't have as much autonomy and choice about becoming a parent if you wanted to do that. University of Michigan not too long ago expanded their insurance coverage for their staff and their faculty to include infertility treatments. And when that happened, a lot of people who had been left out of that, were unable to have children biologically because they couldn't afford infertility treatments, all of a sudden were able to. So just remember that this is like the full spectrum. Reproductive justice and control is about all the decisions from wanting to have children to not wanting to have children, and how you want to have them. Here we're talking about how reproductive control leads us back to this feminist principle that the personal is political. We're talking about very personal decisions about becoming a parent or not becoming a parent. And yet, as we all know, these are also very limited by the political decisions that we make in our country. So a lot of our laws and our legal structures, and even some of our medical laws and medical structures, were set up a long time ago when it was very easy, or we thought it was easy, to determine the maternity of a child. If we witnessed that a woman gave birth to a child and the child comes from the uterus of this person, we assume that we know who the mother is. But because we could never assume that we knew exactly who the father was, many structures in our society were set up to try to ensure that people could know who the father was, what the paternity of a child was. And so, for example, some of the social pressure and legal definitions of marriage and were based around the idea that a woman should be a virgin. She should be able to prove that she's a virgin when she gets married, so that any resulting children from that union could be presumed to belong to that man. Also, to think about this idea of children as property, and who do they belong to? Do they belong to the father of the child? Do they belong to the husband of the mother? Do they belong to the father of the mother? In our legal system, we've made all of those things true at different times in different places, and that concept of owning an embryo or a fetus or a baby are at the core of many of our current day dilemmas and places where we argue about reproductive control issues. Okay, I'm going to ask you to watch a short video that's by Loretta Ross of Sister Song, and she's going to explain what this framework of reproductive justice really means, and no one can say it better than she does, so you should listen to her say it in her own words.
A number of injustices threaten reproductive autonomy in the United States. The RJ MedEd project aims to address current injustices by incorporating a reproductive justice curriculum into medical education. We have asked advocates to share their expertise in the reproductive justice movement, how it can be applied to medicine and patient care.
I'm Loretta Ross. I live in Atlanta, Georgia, and I'm one of the 12 women who co-created the concept of reproductive justice. And I've been a feminist activist for the past 45 years. I think reproductive justice training is very important for physicians so that we can have a real impact on how patient care is delivered through a human rights framework, through a human rights lens. And it really does start with respecting the human rights of the physicians so that they can then respect the human rights of the patients. Most people who encounter the concept of reproductive justice don't understand the difference between the reproductive health framework, the reproductive rights framework, and the reproductive justice framework. Reproductive health is individual care delivery. You treat people for their illnesses or help them stay well. It is a provider centric framework. Reproductive rights is an advocacy framework. That's where we fight to access health care and to protect it through the courts, through the legislature. We advocate for reproductive health care. And most of us on the reproductive health and the reproductive rights side work together to make sure that people's reproductive options are always available to them, including seeing abortion care as reproductive health care and a part of a person's reproductive rights. Reproductive justice, on the other hand, is an organizing framework that works in tandem with the reproductive rights movement and the reproductive health movement. And we believe in the reproductive justice movement that every human being has a human right to have the children that they want to have, to not have the children that they don't want to have, but most importantly, to parent the children that they have in safe and healthy environments. And so the three frameworks work together to form what we call the reproductive human rights movement. Reproductive justice is not just about abortion because the framework also includes the right to have children and to parent the children. And a lot of people make that mistake thinking that we're only talking about abortion, which is kind of strange because if you look at the data, most people who have abortions already have children. So it's not an anti parenting framework to even only talk about abortion. But no, reproductive justice is much broader because we want to protect the right to have children, to prevent unnecessary sterilizations or cesarean sections and things like that, so that one's reproductive choices and options and birth plans are protected. But also, once you have the child, reproductive justice is concerned with access to food, healthcare, education, freedom from gun violence, which is very pertinent right now. So we are much bigger than just talking about the right to abortion.